if you're just joining us. Health workers across the country continue to get the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine. South Africa receiving the second batch of the vaccines this past weekend as it races to curb the spread of COVID-19. Now, the current rollout is part of the Department of Health and the South African Medical Research Council's COVID-19 vaccine rollout implementation study. And the government is expected to roll out more vaccines in the coming months for those willing to be vaccinated. Joining us now to tell us how the vaccine should be rolled out and to the larger population and the approval process, importantly, of the vaccines. We speak to journalist Mia Malan. She is the Bhekisisa Editor-in-chief. Mia, a very good morning to you. And I speak to you on a day that the Deputy President of the country, David Mabuza, is going to be visiting the BioVac Institute. And as we look at this inspection by the Deputy President, I want to get from you first your overall impression about whether the country will indeed meet its deadline of the end of the year to at least have vaccinated 67% of the population in order to reach the herd immunity.
So that will depend on a number of factors. It will depend on whether we can indeed procure enough vaccines, up to 40 million, as the government said we would have to vaccinate by the end of the year. It will depend on how many people we are able to vaccinate per day, and it will also depend on how fast we can register vaccines, because it doesn't matter that if we buy the vaccines, but if they're not registered, we can't use them in the country. And we know that the only vaccine that has been approved so far for use in South Africa is the AstraZeneca vaccine that we will no longer be using. We are still waiting for Johnson & Johnson approval. The only kind of approval that we have is to use it within a study at the moment. Yeah. So also waiting for the Pfizer approval. Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson are the two companies that we have procured vaccines from so far, but we first need to get them registered. So it will all depend on how fast these processes move, but I think the general feeling is that we're not going to be able to do that many people by the end of this year.
You touch on the Johnson & Johnson vaccination process thus far, and I'm choosing those words carefully because some critics have taken issue with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine being labeled a vaccination program when it is, in fact, a study. What's your assessment about why government made that mistake in the first place to call it a vaccination program?
Well, technically it is a study because we are only allowed to use the current Johnson & Johnson vaccines we have within a study setting, and the study has rules. It can only be used on healthcare workers. It's not like we can take this vaccine and apply it to a wider population. So technically it really is a study, but I think there was a lot of anxiety around the fact when it happened so quickly that we couldn't use the AstraZeneca vaccine, and that perhaps there was, semantics that we are starting this rollout with a study. And the reason why we really started the study is because we wanted to find a way to get the vaccine into the country. So we're not testing if the vaccine works. We are just looking at real-life implementation issues and how effective it is in real life. But if we had approval for Johnson & Johnson before the study, we would certainly have gone ahead with a wider rollout and not have needed a study. So it was really an effective way of making it available in some form, although it's a limited form, before it's approved. What we're waiting for now is the full registration of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And this can be a really lengthy process. To give you an idea, it can take up to 2 years for SAHPRA to give a medicine full approval. So what is happening at the moment is SAHPRA has confirmed to Bhekisisa that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine might in the end have 3 types of approval. So they strong possibility, they're talking to Johnson & Johnson to apply for a sort of an in-between type of approval, between clinical trial approval and between full registration. There's something called Section 21, and that is South Africa equivalent of the United States emergency use authorization.
Yeah.
And that doesn't the drug gets registered, it means that you can bring it in if it's safe. And that's much quicker than full registration. So there's a possibility that Johnson & Johnson, while we're waiting for the full approval, will apply for Section 21, and that is a much faster process. The AstraZeneca vaccine got Section 21 approval, and that took about 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, gee whiz. It's quite a process that you've just explained, Mia, but does it not justify then the reticence, if you like, on the part of some health workers who've said, we're not going to allow ourselves to be guinea pigs because this, at the end of the day, is a clinical trial, if you like, and we're not, some of us, we're not going to be happy with our bodies being used for such. Are they justified in those reservations?
I think it's very important to point out that no health worker is being used as a guinea pig in this trial. This is the implementation trial, so it's not a trial that's testing whether the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is safe and whether it has a high efficacy. We already have that data, and we also have data on how effective it is when it comes to the variant that has been identified in South Africa. This is really just a study that looks out issues that might emerge when we roll it out in real life. For instance, what's the take-up like? What are the issues that we encounter in a real-life setting? It's different, it's less controlled than in the setting of a clinical trial. And it's not a trial where some health workers are getting a dummy vaccine and some are getting a real vaccine. They're all getting the real vaccine. And I think another endorsement of the safety of this vaccine is that the United States approved it over the weekend for emergency use authorization, and they're starting with rollout this week. So I really don't think any health worker is being used as a guinea pig. It's really just a matter of a creative way of getting the vaccine into the country, because it's much quicker to get it approved for clinical trial approval than wider use.
Yeah, Mayor, very briefly for me, we're running a story about the health minister stating that teachers are going to be next in line to get vaccinated. You've mentioned that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is only specifically for health workers. So which vaccine is going to be administered to teachers?
So the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is not specific only for health workers. What I meant was within the implementation study that we're conducting, that implementation study is for health workers. So the reason we started with health workers is because they're the most vulnerable, and we want to make sure that we have vaccinated as many as we could from them, of them before our third wave starts. This vaccine will be available once it's registered for wider use to essential workers, including teachers. But we know that we will get Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer so far. The president announced it on Sunday. So teachers might get either of those. It all depends on how many of which vaccine we can get. We know there are huge manufacturing delays at the moment, specifically with Johnson & Johnson. So it depends how many we can get from a company at which stage.
Mia Malan, thank you very much for your time and your insights there. She's a journalist, health journalist, focusing on that particular beat, and just the kind of information we're getting for her, very incisive indeed.